Hi, Founder fans. Jason here, and today we're discussing the Federalist Farmer number 7, continuing our discussion on the Anti-Federalist Papers, The Federalist Farmer. Now, this paper begins a series of papers discussing the House of Representatives in particular, but first he leads off by discussing persuasion versus force. He says that there are really two main forces behind how a government can operate. Either they force their people to do what they say, or they persuade them to, or they give reason. They compel them to by good government. And that's essentially what the Federal Farmer says, is despotic governments use force. Free governments use persuasion. They just do the right thing. Now, the farmer does note that these are extremes, and usually it falls somewhere in the middle as to what exactly will be happening. But he says the United States should try and find its way towards free government, and in all cases, when possible, use persuasion and good government to get the people to want to voluntarily comply with the law. Now, this is where the Federal Farmer moves on to the House of Representatives. It's the first thing he says, because if you want the people to follow what you say, well, you should give the people a little bit of say in what's going on. And he looks at the House of Representatives and says, this just isn't going to really make people want to join the government. In fact, first he stomps over a long treaded trail of a common anti-federalist argument, which is the House of Representatives just isn't big enough. There are not enough representatives in this House to really represent the millions of people who already have better representation at the state level. He then goes on to say, even more than that, you're going to have a few wealthy people, a few politicians, for lack of a better term, end up being in this House of Representatives. However, the House of Representatives is supposed to be the democratic branch of the government. You have the president, which is supposed to be what he calls the monarchical branch, the Senate, which is supposed to be what he calls the aristocratical branch, and the House of Representatives, which is supposed to be the democratical branch. And that branch is supposed to be made up of regular people. Yes, everyone at the time expected the Senate to be made up of wealthy elites. That's just how it went at the time. But they expected the House of Representatives to be made up of common people, for lack of a better term. That's why the term was only 2 years. You just wanted common people coming in and going out, because common people knew what common people wanted and needed. And in this system, with just a handful of openings to become a member of the House of Representatives, well, you're going to have politicians getting in there, and they're going to form cliques and little factions, and it's going to destroy the government. Now, we should, according to the Federal Farmer, open this up much wider to a larger audience so we have more people who can get in there. And on top of that, what he does that's really interesting in this particular paper, he takes the next step and says, we need to account for even different professions. We can't just have all the common people who are merchants. We need common merchants, we need common physicians, we need common artisans and blacksmiths, we need what he calls the mechanical branch, which is, doing blacksmithing, basically. Seamen, we need all sorts of people from all different levels. Of course, he leaves out women and black people and all that nature, but that's not what's important to the Federal Farmer, of course. It's very interesting because you do hear the criticism, it's not big enough often, but you don't often hear him say we need to really make sure we include all portions of society. He actually puts in some quotes from Montesquieu at this point, who was a famous Republican writer from about a century before that everyone at the time was quoting to fill their own cause, no matter what side of the debate they were on. But Farmer uses Montesquieu to point out, look, we need to make sure we're getting all different points of view in the House of Representatives. Sure, we can just have wealthy elites in the Senate, but we need to open up the House of Representatives. And then he concludes by listing out several other things that he plans on covering in the next several papers. And as I said, there are 4 more papers in this particular group from the Federal Farmer about the House of Representatives. From there, he will move on to other branches of the government, of course. But that's about it for paper number 7. The main gist, you want a government that persuades and doesn't have to use force, and we need to make this House of Representatives actually representative. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, definitely hit like. If you're new here, please subscribe. I put out videos about the American Revolution 7 days a week. 6 days a week are about a different founder. 7-day is Anti-Federalist. Eventually, we'll go back and do the Federalist paper. Until then, I'll be back with another founder for you tomorrow.